What's up, Dallas? I'm so excited to be here. Woo! Yeah! We're back in person. I've got a lot of friends who are musicians, and they're so jealous of me right now. Not a lot of people can say they performed on stage at House of Blues. Headline, there you go. Thank you for coming. For the folks online, thank you for being here. You're taking time out of your day, and I'm really honored that you're here to spend it with me. So who am I? I'm George Finney, as the title slide kind of indicates. I wrote a book on cybersecurity, but I'm also, my day job, I'm the CISO for Southern Methodist University here in Dallas, Texas. So we get back to school in a couple weeks. I hope if you follow college football, I think you probably know it looks like we're going to have a pretty good season. So get your tickets now before the prices go up. I wrote this book, Well Aware, and I hope you'll stick around and come to the book signing later. But it's called Well Aware: Master the 9 Cybersecurity Habits to Protect Your Future. I wanted to call it the 9 habits of highly effective cybersecurity people, but we thought Stephen Covey would sue me. And so we kind of changed the name to Well Aware. But the idea was that it's a non-technical security book. So I think security folks will get something out of it. But I also wanted to write a book that lay people would get something out of. So we know today that CEOs are being fired for not getting security right. And it's that last part of the title that's kind of in small print. It's master the habits to protect your future. So if you have an aspiration today to be a CEO, you're going to need to understand cybersecurity. And I think that falls down the line as well. If you're going to be a VP of sales, or if you're going to be a CFO or a general counsel, you're going to need to understand cybersecurity. And I think we in cybersecurity can stand to do a better job of building that bridge with those folks. And so I think that connection is really important. So I wrote the book, similar to how Covey and other business books are written. I tell stories. And so I interviewed hundreds of leaders, not just in cybersecurity, but in lots of industries. I talked to psychologists and neuroscientists, and I get to tell some really fun stories along the way. But one of the things that I didn't do for the book, I tried to not tell a ton of stories about myself. And so today, I'm going to kind of give you my origin story, if you will. As it turns out, it's actually kind of unlikely that I should even be here talking to you today. Let's see if, there we go. When I was 10 years old, I was having a lot of excruciating pain. And so I actually, I went to the hospital, and I stayed in the hospital for about 6 weeks. So this would have been in the 5th grade. And, they kept running tests, every day, some new battery of kind of awful, gross tests. It took them a long time to figure out what was actually wrong with me. And I was out of school so long that the teachers were actually talking about holding me back a grade. And so I wasn't having any of that. I actually got my friends to start bringing me my homework in the hospital. And I would do my homework, and they'd send it back the next day. I'd get more, but I essentially just taught myself for that 6 weeks. And we'd eventually find out that I have this autoimmune disease where my immune system is attacking my body, and I would be on medication for the rest of my life to suppress my immune system. But before we had that diagnosis, there was this day that I kind of vividly remember. I was in my room, my parents were there, and the doctor came in, and he said, Mr. and Mrs. Finney, I want you to come outside. I need to talk to you in private for a little bit. And I was a smart 10-year-old, by the way, so I knew what this meant. And they left the room, and I started crying. And the nurse came, she was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, dude, you don't have to sugarcoat it. I know what's happening here. I'm going to die. And spoiler alert, I didn't die. But so she kind of comforted me, and I don't really actually remember. I don't know if I even know what the doctor said. It was probably just some stupid insurance question. But they came back in, and everything was fine. But it's really unlikely that I should even be here today. So going a little further back, I'm from Indiana. We lived in a trailer when I was just a baby. And my parents told me the story where a tornado actually picked our trailer up and threw it a little bit while me and my dad were inside. And so my parents did the right thing, and they moved to Texas. So I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could, right? And we moved to Arlington. So I grew up in Arlington, but our apartment was right down the street from the GM plant in Arlington, if you know where that is. And if you've been by the GM plant in Arlington, you'll know that that's really not the best neighborhood. And it wasn't a very good neighborhood when I was there. And so I was riding my tricycle. I think I was probably 4 years old, out in front of our apartment, and I was electrocuted. And so it turns out that a maintenance man had left a live wire laying right in front of our apartment. And I actually don't have much of a memory of that incident either, because I was electrocuted. But I do remember the charred blackened holes that it left in my metal tricycle. And it turns out that a few months later, we'd actually have to leave that apartment because they were condemned because of all the fires that were happening at the apartment. So I think there were 5 fires in 6 months, mostly due to faulty electrical wiring. And at the time, I thought that was normal. I thought, okay, this is just how things go. And so why am I telling you this? I'm obviously, I'm not saying it for sympathy. I'm doing okay now. But I want you to know that all of us have gone through troubled times in our lives, right? All of us have dealt with tragedy, have faced real issues throughout life. And so, I want you to know that you're not alone. Right, we often don't talk about these things. We don't share them, and I think that isolates us. Sometimes we play our cards close to the vest. And sorry, by the way, this is not a picture of me. This is just some random picture of a person in a hospital that I found on the internet. But again, we're not going through life alone. So since we're back in person, that means that we get to do audience participation again. So I want all of you in the room, even if you're at home, I want you to repeat after me. I want you to say, I am not alone. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. I am not alone. We can do better than that. Let's say it a little louder. I am not alone. Doesn't that make you feel good? Right, when I say it, I don't know about you, but I feel like a little bit of weight is off my shoulders. Even when I was practicing in front of the mirror at home, when I was doing the speech, I felt good. It feels good to know that you're not alone. And this is important. So I'm telling you all this super personal stuff about me because I know that no matter who you are, you've probably felt alone in your life. You've probably been a little afraid. You've struggled, right? All of us have done that. All of us have our own origin stories that we could tell. And I think one consequence of that is that no matter who you are, I think we all want to be secure, right? And I think the ironic thing is that it's unlikely that I would be here because of all of the challenges that I faced along the way. The ironic thing about that, it's also, if not for the fact that I had to go through all of those things, I also wouldn't be here today, right? Those things helped shape me. They forged my personality into the kind of person that can take on these challenges that we're facing in cybersecurity today. So I want to tell you another origin story. So you've probably all heard of the person Helen Keller. Most people forget or maybe never even knew that she wasn't born blind and deaf. She was born totally normally. She actually got sick when she was just 19 months old. And she got so sick that she actually lost her sight and her hearing. And so, picture, if you will, she lived on a farm in the 1880s. So they didn't have childproofing back then, and farms in general are maybe a dangerous place to live. They have livestock. There could have been holes to fall in or nails, rusty metal lying around. Keller not only survived, but she thrived. And she thrived because of the people around her. They made it possible. And there was obviously her teacher, Anne Sullivan. There was her family, obviously. But there was also this community of folks who were blind, or there were schools for the blind and deaf. There was that community for the blind that created Braille so she could learn to read. And she ultimately go on to write a number of books. And so even though she couldn't see or hear the people around her, Helen Keller was never alone. And so I actually came across this quote that's up on the screen now back in high school, and it really resonated with me at the time, and it does even so still today. And so, I know you can read it, but I'm going to go ahead and read it as well. So she says, "Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing." So I don't look back at my life and feel sorry for myself. Like Keller, I think I realized early on that I was going to be on an adventure. So I maybe it's just the name, but I really identify with the cartoon character Curious George. And so, I think, I always wanted to be an explorer. I'm a Trekkie. For those of you who know me, know, I love that idea of going out and exploring. And sometimes exploring can be scary. You don't know what's out there. And sometimes what's out there can eat you. Sometimes you can't see what's out there, and it can also hurt you as well. So I probably shouldn't do this, but one of the things that I like to do in my spare time is I play pranks on people. I've taught my daughter, she's 6 now, I've taught her to play pranks. This will definitely come back to haunt me later. But I do this sometimes without thinking of it. And so I was at the office a few months back, and without even thinking about it, I started tricking one of my colleagues into believing something that wasn't true. And I totally fooled her. And maybe I've just missed a career in social engineering, or maybe I've got a really good poker face. But I had her. I really had her going, and of course I said, "No, I'm sorry, just kidding," and we had a nice laugh. But she's not a dumb person. So I work at a university, so you might imagine I work with a lot of really, really smart people, and she's got multiple PhDs. She was a Fulbright scholar. She's trilingual, and she's written more books than I have, which is kind of saying something. But you know what she told me? She said, "Oh, I'm so gullible. I'll fall for anything." Right? That's her identity. Right? Whatever it is about her and her origin story, that's who she believes herself to be. So this really bothered me, and I had to think about it for a little while. And again, I've written a book kind of on security awareness, and I wondered, how can I ever have an impact on her? How could I help her believe that she could make a difference in security if that's who she thinks she is, if that's who such an intelligent person thinks that she is, and maybe always will be gullible. And so my answer to this is that there are a lot of different types of personalities out there when it comes to security, and that's okay, because there are lots of different roles to play when it comes to security. And so just because we're good at one thing but not everything, doesn't mean that we're a failure. We just need to understand ourselves. We need to understand where we're all coming from, and what our strengths are a little better, in order to kind of believe that we can make a difference. And so, I called this talk "Fighting FUD with FUD." Right? So let's pause here for a second. There's that old FUD. Can we boo FUD? Boo. Right. So we need to take that FUD out back. We need to kill it and bury it in the yard. And out of its ashes, I think a new FUD can spawn like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And the new FUD, I think, should be fearlessness, unshakable, and determination, or determined. And I think it's going to take understanding ourselves and understanding who we are as people in order to be able to make that happen. We've got to get rid of fear. We've got to get rid of uncertainty. We've got to get rid of doubt. And how do we do that? I think we do that by knowing ourselves. But before we get there, I've got to talk about the elephant in the room, security awareness. So I've heard from a lot of people that security awareness training doesn't work. And I've thought a lot about it. As you might imagine, I wrote a book that kind of addresses this. But the conclusion that I've come to is that the answer is a lot like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're not familiar, if you're not a nerd like me, definitely check it out. It's a book, it's a TV series, it's multiple movies. But one of the things that happens in this book is that some crazy scientists somewhere invent a computer, and they ask the computer to come up with the answer to the question, what's the meaning of life? And it says, okay, cool, come back to me in 1,000,000 years and I'll give you the answer. And so they come back to it in 1,000,000 years, and it tells them the answer to the meaning of life is 42. And they're like, okay, hang on. What are you talking about now? We waited 1,000,000 years and this is your answer. And the computer, who is essentially like God at this point, it's such an intelligent AI. It's like, well, you didn't understand the question. So let me elaborate a little bit more about how that connects back to security awareness. So in the process of doing the research for my book, it took me about 3 years to write the book, and in part it took so long because I did a lot of research into psychology and neuroscience. And one of the things that I came across is that, generally speaking, people, human beings, are better at performing analytical or problem-solving tasks in the morning versus the afternoon. And so, I'll give you some examples. Students, the same students taking the same test in the morning versus the afternoon always perform better. So with the SATs, for example, students will perform better by like 100 points, which is enough to have gotten me into SMU for undergrad. I didn't go to SMU for undergrad, by the way. This happens across all disciplines. Doctors make fewer mistakes when they're performing surgeries, for example, in the morning versus the afternoon. They find more issues and are able to successfully detect more issues in the morning versus the afternoon. So if you only take one thing away from this talk today, I hope you'll take away that, if you're going to schedule an appointment with your doctor, book that morning slot. if you're going to go take that next certification exam, go ahead and book the morning, and maybe you'll have a better shot at passing. So the slide that I have up shows you my simulated phishing campaigns over the course of the last 7 years. So I'm pretty excited about this. Professionally, I've sent about 25,000 simulated phishing messages to my campus, to both students and employees. So it's a fun hobby, right? But after I came across this research, I thought, okay, cool. I wonder if what we're seeing with these other disciplines applies to simulated phishing messages. And you can kind of see from the graph, it pretty clearly does. So in my example, it varies slightly from campaign to campaign, but my users were 8 to 10 times more likely to click on a phishing message in the afternoon versus the morning. Isn't that crazy? Users are 8 to 10 times more likely to click on a phishing message in the afternoon versus the morning. So I was giving this talk to a group of MIT faculty members a few months back, and I got to this slide, and one of the faculty members jumped up, and they were like, "Oh my God, George, I was one of the postdocs back when we were doing this research 20 years ago, and we looked at the cortisol levels of human beings throughout the day, and George, it's the same graph. It's the same graph." And it kind of blew my mind that like I didn't know this person, and all of a sudden we had this connection. But it just didn't stop with simulated phishing messages. I realized that I had real phishing messages as well, and my users would report to them. So I looked at my help desk tickets for these reports, and as it turns out, my users were 3 times more likely to have reported a phishing message in the morning versus the afternoon, because they're more able to perform analytical skills, right? And so when you look at this graph, what do you see? If users are actually successful in the mornings at identifying phishing and reporting it, and they're less likely to click on those phishing messages, right? This is the ideal. This tells me that my security awareness training is working. It's just that they're biologically more vulnerable in the afternoons because of the way they're wired. And so what's the answer to this? If we know that our users are more vulnerable at a certain time of day, well, what are we going to do about it? So my first thought was, I'll just tell everyone to take the afternoon off, right? And so obviously that didn't go over very well. But again, I'm thinking about behavior change, and I'm writing this book about habits. And the more that I researched, I found that actually the way that habits work is it's almost a little like your brain has pre-processed, if in a computer analogy, some tasks, and it's actually written, that code into an algorithm, or it's if you're familiar with ASICs, right? We've written it into silicon. The habits actually work in a different part of your brain than cognition, than analytical skills. It actually, habits work inside your basal ganglia. It's a little tiny, size of a pea down in the oldest parts of your brain. And so when we look at habits aren't dependent on these variations in cortisol levels. And I think that's why habits are so important to making real change when it comes to cybersecurity. So let me pivot for a second and talk about the 9 cybersecurity habits. So I'm going to tell you the origin story of the 9 habits themselves. So I actually started out with this gigantic spreadsheet of hundreds of entries of all the different tips and tricks and advice that we give in cybersecurity. And I started to try and figure out, okay, well, are these, are there groupings here that would make sense? So, really the idea was we've got all these frameworks when it comes to cybersecurity, whether it's NIST or the CIS controls or others, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But those aren't really designed to help me as an individual change the way that I behave. They're great frameworks for organizations. So I started trying to correlate all these different behaviors in my gigantic spreadsheet. And since we know that we want people to repeat these behaviors, right? We need to make them something they do every day. And by definition, that's what a habit is. And ultimately, I figured out that cybersecurity isn't just one habit. There are 9 different groupings of habits that we can focus on for behavior change. And so in the book I talk about, I didn't realize this as I was writing the book, but as I kind of figured out what the different habits were, I realized that there are actually specific parts of your brain that align with each of these habits. So for example, for skepticism, the center of your brain that controls skepticism is actually your amygdala. The center of your brain that has to do with the 8th habit, mirroring, there's actually something in your brain called mirror neurons that are very influential in learning and interacting with other human beings. And so feel free to check out the book and read more, but I think it's fascinating. So the habits are, if it's too small to read, the habits are literacy, skepticism, vigilance, secrecy, culture, diligence, community, mirroring, and deception. And so we ask our users to take lots of different kinds of security training, right? Some's online, someone's in person. Sometimes we do fun things like cyber escape rooms. Sometimes we annoy our users by sending them simulated phishing messages. But what I really wanted to know when I started out this project is what the most effective training was. And we do like A/B testing for marketing, for email campaigns or for websites. We do testing for firewalls or antivirus or IPSs to figure out what the most effective thing is, but we don't do that when it comes to security awareness training. And why not? And I think the part of the challenge is that what metric would we even use to measure that training? How would we decide whether it's effective or not? And I think ultimately that metric is behavior change. And since we know, again, one of the things I learned in writing the book is that 50% of all of the behaviors that we have in our lives, everything we do, 50% of it is based in habits. And so I think the most effective means for training our users has to be based in changing our habits. But there was another thing that I came across along the way. What I realized is that the first 4 habits, literacy, skepticism, vigilance, and secrecy, are all things that we do inside of ourselves. They're internal habits. And the other 5 habits are all external things. They're things that we do with other people. And so, I think we all have our own, strengths among those. And so, I've come up with this matrix. So your strongest internal strength combined with your strongest external strength combines, and I think that defines your personality. And everybody has their own unique strengths when it comes to the 9 habits. So, you've got your own unique combination of both internal and external strengths, right? And so I've developed this personality test that helps you identify which of the 9 cybersecurity habits is your strength, similar to kind of like Myers-Briggs. And as it turns out, this shouldn't be surprising at this point in the talk, but my biggest strength is diligence and vigilance, which makes me a cybersecurity explorer. And I didn't start out this way. I actually took the test after I wrote it and realized, oh my gosh, this is so true, because I have to have high diligence and high vigilance to help manage my disease. I have to make sure I'm taking my medication on time. I'm having to watch out for any flare-ups or before they start so that I can help manage them. And that's who I've developed since I was really a kid, and I think that's defined who I am today. And that's not to say that I'm good at everything, but it does mean that I have to understand my personality. And man, I wish that I knew 10 or 20 years ago this about myself, and I think that it would have just helped accelerate my career. So I'll invite you to take the test. It's totally free. You can go to my website, and it takes just a couple of minutes. But hundreds of people so far have already taken the beta test of the cyber personality test, is what I'm calling it. But again, for me, I love seeing that when a company has 10 or 20 people take the test. And you can kind of start to see, wow, look at all of them. Like, I can see how that team operates or how that department operates. And so I should give a disclaimer here. Please do take the test. You'll have to give me your email address at the end. But as a thank you, I'm going to send you some customized habit recipes just for your personality type to help you get yourself started. And also, there'll be discounts on the book. I've got a masterclass on udemy.com that you can take to learn more about all the habits, and there are even more habit recipes along the way there. But my hope is that eventually I'll be able to say for CEOs or CFOs or CIOs or CISOs that these are the top 2 or 3 personality types most common to those roles. My hope is that with this personality test, someone new to securities, just starting out in their career, can help just get their journey started that much faster, because that personality type really aligns well in terms of your personal values with operations or pen testing or what have you. And so I'll skip ahead for a second. But I also, I know that because I'm a cybersecurity explorer, I'm not great at everything. You might be a scientist or a believer or enforcer or even a rebel. And that's cool. I want to build out that data to really understand. But there are a lot of things that I'm not good at because I'm an explorer. Maybe culture or maybe skepticism aren't my natural strengths. And that's okay, because I've got a team around me to help support those other strengths. And my team also has different goals, right? So maybe I work in a SOC. That's going to be very operations focused. So maybe that team needs to be more heavy in vigilance. Or maybe a leadership team might need to be more balanced in terms of the different strengths. So this is actually a plot of a nonprofit group that I'm a part of, and you can see how kind of well balanced the group is, but they're also very focused on vigilance here with 4 folks in that category. So again, I would love to have your input to the test. But going back for a second, I skipped over this slide. When I became a CISO several years ago, I decided to start thinking about myself more as a coach. So I know that there are thousands of people in my organization who make hundreds of decisions, maybe a day, and I can't be there to make all the decisions for them, right? But I do know that I need to support them. They have to be able to know which decisions have an impact to security. They need to know when to bring me in to help call a play. If I need to come in at halftime and make an adjustment, right? How do I do that? And so one of the things I started doing was reading all of these books by former coaches. So great literature out there, by the way. If you haven't read much in that genre, definitely check it out. But one of the ones that really, really stood out to me was this book by a former NFL coach, Tony Dungy. And Dungy, so I'll give you the background. Again, I love telling stories. But Dungy was the coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1996. He became head coach when the Buccaneers were a terrible team. So I know they just won the Super Bowl, but they weren't always very good. And maybe they haven't been good very much at all over the years. But Dungy would take the Bucks to the playoffs for 4 out of the 6 seasons that he was the head coach. And so he was fired in 2001 after they went out in the first round of the playoffs. But that same team that he built with marginal changes, other than obviously the head coach, would win the Super Bowl in 2002. And so, Dungy was instrumental in bringing things in like the Tampa 2 defense that's very well known today. And you'll probably also have noticed that he's not wearing a Tampa Bay Bucks uniform because right after he became the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. And he would take the Indianapolis Colts to the playoffs for 7 straight seasons. He would win the Super Bowl with that team after 4 seasons. So there's question, right? With these teams, sometimes great teams would lose, and sometimes bad teams would win. And in the book, he talks about why he thinks that was the case. And the Tampa Bay Bucks in 2001, he thinks that one of the reasons they lost is because they didn't believe they could win. Right, inside the locker room, you could tell they just didn't know, they didn't have that certainty that they could do it. Same thing with the Colts, and so I've thought about it. I think I mentioned it already in the talk, but there's an unofficial motto in cybersecurity today. So I want you to all say it with me. People are the weakest link. Okay, no, don't say that. That's fine. Don't say it. You cannot say it. Maybe we need to just stop saying it because it's wrong. Right? People aren't the weakest link. They're the biggest attack surface, certainly. But I think we need to stop saying it because that belief is, I think, one of the biggest things standing in the way of us actually being successful at being secure. Before I can even get started with doing all those things that I need to proactively do, it's going to be a lot of work to be secure, to make sure I've got all those patches in place. I need to believe that I'm the kind of person that can value security, that can do that job. And what do we say? What did the PhD at SMU say? I'm just gullible. I'm never gonna. And what do we believe in security, right? We say, well, the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair, right? And I think we need to take a look at those beliefs. And if we don't believe that we can be successful, we're never going to be successful. And I think, again, we all already have our own origin stories, and those origin stories point us in the direction of valuing security. We all have our own unique strengths and perspectives, and I think the habits and the personality test will help jumpstart that process of seeing yourself, again, as someone who values security and can make a difference. There's been a lot of great books lately about habits. There's my book, by the way. I think you're all going to get a copy. So definitely check that out. And by the way, if you for the folks online or the folks sitting in the audience, please, I would consider it a personal favor if you post a review on Amazon or Audible or Goodreads, wherever you like to post reviews. That just helps get the word out even more. But I was really inspired by some of the other books about habits that are out there, like Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit, or James Clear's Atomic Habits, or B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits. You'll see B.J. Fogg has a behavioral model that's circulated fairly frequently on LinkedIn. He's very influential. But they all agree that there's this habit loop. They use slightly different terminology, and so I've adopted the terminology PBR, because that was my favorite beverage in college. But the habit loop starts with a prompt, whatever tells you to start that habit. Then there's the behavior, the habit itself. And people forget about the final step of the habit, which is the reward. And the reward is what releases some endorphins in your brain, and that tricks your brain into doing that habit again the next time you see that cue, and thus cementing the loop. You know, the whole idea is that we can hack our brains into being more secure by focusing on being intentional about what habits we create. And by the way, before I move on, my favorite of those three books that I listed is actually B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits. And he introduces this concept that he calls habit recipes. So it's kind of like a cookbook. So, you know, your ingredients are, you know, the prompts and the behaviors and the rewards. And you can kind of come up with your own recipes for being successful. And so, you know, I'll give you an example of some of the recipes that I've come up with. But you know, the whole idea is that in order to be secure, we need to make it easy. You know, you've probably come across the advice that, you know, if you want to start running in the morning, go to sleep with your workout clothes on and have your running shoes there by the side of the bed. And that advice really works for people because it's not judgy. It just naturally works. And so, you know, the advice that we give in security, you know, we say, never write your password down, never use social media. And then what happens when people get into trouble and they come back to us and we say, I told you so, right? People don't want to work with us because nobody wants to hear "I told you so." But this recipe for success, just leaving your shoes by the bed in the morning, it gets rid of all the obstacles, but it's also not judgmental, right? It's just actionable, and I think that really resonates with people. So I've developed some of these recipes for success. But you can probably get the slide deck. I'll also send you some customized habit recipes if you sign up for the personality test. But I want to focus on secrecy for a second. So the habit that I really like to focus on for secrecy is locking your computer before you get up and walk away from your desk. It's very easy to do. Very well-defined prompt, right? I'm about to stand up from my desk. Behavior, you know, press Control-Alt-Delete or Windows L to lock your computer. And then the reward, you know, since we're at House of Blues, maybe you're walking away and you're going to play a little air guitar on the way to wherever you're going, to your meeting or to lunch. So I bring up this habit recipe because I've personally dismissed, you know, the importance of locking your computer as you walk away, in part because I have a technology solution for that, right? I can push out a group policy and make people lock their computers after 5 minutes of inactivity. And well, do I need to worry about habits if I have a technology solution for that? And the answer to that is yes. And why is that? Because this is such an easy, low-hanging fruit to help people create that identity as someone that, hey, you know, I had that talk with George, and you know, this is really cool, and I feel like I'm contributing now just by, you know, pressing some keys and celebrating a little bit. That I think helps people believe that they can make a difference. They can be a part of the conversation. So, you know, obviously we've got habit recipes for all of the habits, but I want to talk about the final habit, deception, for a second. I like to tell people, you know, for your password challenge questions, I want you to lie. And why is that? Because, you know, if you don't, it's really easy to guess someone's, you know, place of birth. It's really easy to guess their spouse's middle name, right? You know, if you lie, it's significantly more challenged to just reset your password and steal your account. And so the example, the story I like to tell is my daughter, again, she's really young. When she was 5, we were going through the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A, and she said, "Hey, Dad, don't tell him your real name. Give him a fake name." I'm like, what? Why? And they're like, they don't need to know your name. Just they don't care. Just tell them. And so that's what we do now. The cue is, or the prompt is going through the drive-thru to get takeout. The behavior is giving a fake name, and the reward, you know, for us, it's that bonding time between the two of us. I mean, it could be, you know, the reward could be the French fries, or the fresh lemonade or what have you. But all of those different rewards will work differently for different people. We all have different things that we love and get excited about, and so. We need to, you know, going back to the title of the talk, you know, getting rid of FUD. You know, in security, we use fear to sell our products. We use fear to get budget, to help improve our programs. And the problem with that is, again, going back to the psychology research, fear is an excellent motivator to get people to avoid doing something. If we want to get people to not touch a hot stove, right, fear is the right tool for that, but we need to have multiple tools in our tool belt. And if we want to proactively get them to do something, really anything other than avoiding doing things, we have to have a different tool. And that tool looks like hope. It looks like inspiration. And when we use scary messages or we create doubt in others, or uncertainty when we say things like it's only a matter of when we get hacked, not if, and the bad guys are always going to be out there after us, we're only fostering that culture of uncertainty and fear. And instead, I think we need to be fearless. And we need to protect all of those things around us, right? We need to instead be unshakable in our knowledge of who we are, right? That foundation is what will give us certainty. We need to get rid of doubt and replace it with determination. And I interviewed you know, lots of security people for the book, and not all of them made it into the book, in part because some have NDAs in place and couldn't talk on the record. Some of the PR departments said, no, we can't sign off on that. We don't want to paint a target on our backs, which I totally understand. But almost without exception, every security leader that I talked to said the thing that motivates them in their careers is making a difference. And having that focus to have an impact on the world, I think is something that we all want to do. And so I think we're explorers. So I'm going to leave you with one final story before we take questions. But like Helen Keller, we're on a daring adventure in security, right? We're not the kid, the story of the kid plugging our finger into the dike, and then another, you know, a spring comes out of it, and another crack, and we have to keep plugging our fingers. Nobody wants to be that. We want to be the people that fix the dam. And so there's the story of Lewis and Clark, right? Lewis and Clark were explorers to set out exploring the United States when we were just an early on in our country, and they went on a 2-year journey. They sometimes, but imagine that 2 years out in the wilderness. Think about all the scary things that they had to have seen. All of the challenges they had to overcome, the hostile elements that were out there, that were, you know, kind of out to get them. But think about when they came back from their journey. What did they not do? For having me out. It's really an honor to be here. So again, thank you guys.